At my brother's engagement dinner, my place card said "The Failure." Everyone laughed except me. I raised my glass and announced, "To family, the kind you learn to live without." Then I walked out, took back the bike I paid for, and canceled every reservation they were toasting to. I, 29M, thought I knew what betrayal felt like until I walked into that upscale restaurant last Saturday evening. The golden light from the chandeliers cast long shadows across white tablecloths, and the gentle murmur of conversation filled the air. My brother's engagement dinner was supposed to be a celebration, but the moment I spotted my place card, I realized it was actually my execution. My brother had always been the golden child. While I scraped through community college and bounced between jobs, he sailed through law school and landed a position at a prestigious firm. Our parents never missed an opportunity to remind me of the comparison. When he announced his engagement 3 months ago, I genuinely felt happy for him. Despite everything, he was still my brother. I should have seen the signs when planning began. My input wasn't requested for venue selection, guest lists, or dinner arrangements. When I offered to help financially, Mom brushed me off, saying they had everything handled. I found out later that my brother's fiancée had specifically requested I be seated at the far end of the table, away from the important guests. The day before the dinner, I had spent my entire paycheck on a custom motorcycle for my brother. He'd always talked about wanting to ride, and I thought it would be the perfect engagement gift. I arranged for it to be delivered to his apartment that morning, with a note saying I was proud of him and excited to welcome his fiancée into our family. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, wearing my best suit, the only suit I owned. The hostess led me through the main dining area to a private room where our family had gathered. About 20 people were milling around, glasses of champagne in hand, laughing and chatting in small groups. My brother saw me first and walked over with a strange expression on his face. He thanked me for the motorcycle, but his tone felt flat, almost mechanical. He mentioned that his fiancée had been concerned about the expense and wondered if I could afford such a generous gift. The way he said it made my stomach drop, like he was questioning whether I'd stolen the money or gone into debt for it. I brushed off his concern and moved toward our parents. Dad gave me a brief nod while Mom air-kissed my cheek without making contact. They were both focused on impressing the fiancé's family, who had flown in from the East Coast. I recognized the type immediately: old money, country club memberships, vacation homes in the Hamptons. When dinner was announced, everyone began looking for their seats. I scanned the elegantly set table, searching for my name among the cream-colored place cards. I found it at the very end, next to my teenage cousin who was on her phone the entire evening. But it wasn't my name on the card. In elegant calligraphy, it read, "The Failure." My blood turned to ice. I stared at those words, reading them over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood. Around me, people were settling into their seats, and I heard muffled snickering from somewhere behind me. I looked up to see several family members trying to hide their amusement, hands covering their mouths as they exchanged glances. My brother's fiancée was watching me with barely concealed satisfaction. She leaned over to whisper something to her mother, who glanced in my direction and smiled coldly. My own mother was adjusting her napkin, refusing to meet my eyes. I remained standing while everyone else sat down. The room gradually fell silent as they realized something was wrong. My brother finally looked at me with what I can only describe as fake concern and asked if I was okay. He suggested I take my seat so we could begin. I held up the place card for everyone to see. I asked whose idea this was, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. More snickering erupted from various corners of the table. Someone, I think it was my uncle, made a comment about how I should be used to jokes by now, given my track record. My brother's fiancée spoke up then, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She said it was just a little family humor and that I shouldn't take everything so seriously. She mentioned that everyone knew I had a good sense of humor about my situation. The way she emphasized situation made it clear she was referring to my struggles with employment and relationships. My brother said nothing. He sat there, looking uncomfortable but not defending me, not telling his fiancée that this had gone too far, not standing up for his own brother. That's when something inside me snapped. I walked to the small side table where extra champagne bottles were chilling and poured myself a full glass. The room was dead silent now, everyone watching to see what I would do. I could feel 20 pairs of eyes following my every movement. I raised my glass high and announced that I wanted to make a toast. My voice was steady, controlled, almost conversational. I said I wanted to toast family, specifically, the kind you learn to live without. I talked about how family should lift you up, not tear you down for entertainment. I mentioned that real family doesn't humiliate you at what's supposed to be a celebration. The silence in that room was deafening. My brother's face had gone pale, and his fiancée looked like she'd been slapped. My parents were staring at their plates, probably calculating how much this outburst would cost them in social standing. I took a long sip of champagne, savoring the taste and the moment. Then I set the glass down on the white tablecloth and walked toward the door. My brother called after me as I reached the entrance to the private dining room. He said we could talk about this, that maybe the joke had gone too far. But his tone suggested he was more concerned about saving face than genuinely apologizing. I turned back to face the entire table. I told them to enjoy their dinner and their celebration. I mentioned that they should make the most of the evening because some things were about to change. Then I walked out, leaving behind a room full of confused and increasingly worried faces. My first stop was my brother's apartment complex. I still had the spare key he'd given me months ago when I'd helped him move in. The motorcycle was parked in his assigned spot, still gleaming under the parking lot lights. I had all the paperwork in my car: purchase receipt, registration documents, insurance papers. Everything was in my name because I planned to transfer ownership to him after the engagement dinner. Legally, the bike was still mine. I took photos of everything for documentation, then called a friend who owned a truck. Within an hour, we had loaded the motorcycle and driven it to a secure storage facility across town. I left a note on my brother's door explaining that the bike would be returned when he was ready to have an honest conversation about respect and family. Back at home, I opened my laptop and began making phone calls. Over the past 3 months, I'd overheard enough conversations to piece together their wedding plans. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, the florist. I'd absorbed details without really paying attention at the time. My brother had mentioned during family dinners that several vendors required large deposits, and that some bookings were made under my parents' names due to credit issues on his end. What he didn't know was that I'd helped my parents with some of those deposits when they were short on cash. I started with the wedding venue, an upscale country club that required a $15,000 deposit. When I called, I explained that there had been a family emergency and we needed to cancel the reservation immediately. Since the booking was partially in my name as a co-signer for the deposit, I had the authority to make changes. The photographer was next. I'd actually recommended him, a friend from high school who'd built a successful wedding photography business. When I explained the situation, he was understanding and agreed to cancel, especially since no contract had been signed yet. The florist proved more challenging until I mentioned that I was the one who had provided her business card to my parents in the first place. She remembered our conversation and was willing to work with me on canceling the arrangements. One by one, I methodically canceled or significantly altered every reservation I could legally touch. Some vendors were sympathetic when I explained there had been family conflicts. Others were simply following their cancellation policies. My phone started ringing around 11 p.m. First my parents, then my brother, then his fiancée. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages ranged from angry to pleading to threatening legal action. My brother's first message was furious. He accused me of sabotaging his wedding out of jealousy and spite. He said I was proving exactly why the place card had been accurate, that I really was a failure who couldn't handle a simple joke. My mother's message was different. She sounded panicked as she explained how much money they'd lose on deposits and how difficult it would be to find replacement vendors on short notice. She begged me to call her back so we could work something out. The third message came from my brother's fiancée. Her voice was ice cold as she threatened to sue me for intentional interference with their wedding plans. She said she had witnesses to my unstable behavior at the dinner and that her father's law firm would be contacting me. I saved all the messages but didn't respond to any of them. Update 1. The next morning brought a series of increasingly desperate communications. My brother showed up at my apartment around 9 a.m., pounding on the door and demanding I let him in. Through the door, I told him we could have a conversation when he was ready to apologize, not just for the dinner, but for years of allowing our family to treat me as the designated failure. He stood there for nearly an hour, alternating between anger and attempts at reasoning. He claimed the place card was his fiancée's idea and that he hadn't known about it beforehand. He insisted he would have stopped it if he'd seen it in advance. I asked him why he hadn't defended me when I held up the card, why he'd sat there silently while his fiancée made excuses and minimized the humiliation. His silence told me everything I needed to know. Around noon, my parents arrived. They looked haggard, like they'd been up all night making phone calls and trying to salvage the wedding plans. My father demanded I stop acting like a child and fix the mess I created. My mother was crying, talking about how embarrassed she was and how the fiancé's family would never forgive this disruption. I pointed out that they'd been embarrassed by me for years, so this shouldn't be anything new. I reminded them of every family gathering where they'd introduced me with apologies for my shortcomings, every conversation where my struggles were used as cautionary tales for other family members. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. My teenage cousin, the one who'd been seated next to me at the dinner, knocked on my door with information that changed everything. She told me she'd overheard conversations while everyone thought she was absorbed in her phone. The place card wasn't a spontaneous joke. It had been planned for weeks. My brother's fiancée had suggested it during a family planning meeting I wasn't invited to. She'd argued that I needed to be put in my place before the wedding to prevent me from embarrassing them in front of her family's important friends. My brother hadn't objected. In fact, he'd laughed and agreed that it might toughen me up and help me develop thicker skin. My parents had been uncomfortable, but ultimately went along with it to avoid conflict with the future daughter-in-law. The truly devastating part was learning that they'd all discussed what my reaction might be. They'd anticipated that I would be hurt and probably leave early. The fiancée had actually said she hoped I would make a scene, so they'd have justification for not inviting me to the wedding. Armed with this information, I had to decide what kind of person I wanted to be going forward. I could continue the escalation, using my cousin's testimony to expose their premeditation and destroy their relationships permanently. Or I could set boundaries while leaving room for eventual healing. I chose a middle path that surprised everyone, including myself. Update 2. I drafted a letter that I sent to every family member who had been at the dinner. In it, I explained exactly what the place card had meant to me and why their laughter had been so devastating. I detailed years of feeling like the family disappointment and how the dinner had been the final confirmation that they saw me as entertainment rather than someone worthy of respect. But I also acknowledged my own role in accepting their treatment for so long. I admitted that by not standing up for myself earlier, I'd inadvertently taught them that humiliating me was acceptable. The letter outlined my new boundaries. I would no longer attend family events where I was expected to be the target of jokes or comparisons. I would not contribute financially to family celebrations unless there was genuine respect and appreciation involved. Most importantly, I would not allow anyone to treat me as less than a full family member. Regarding the motorcycle and canceled reservations, I offered a compromise. I would help them rebuild their wedding plans, but only after receiving genuine apologies from everyone involved, not just my brother and his fiancée, but my parents and anyone else who had participated in or condoned the humiliation. The reactions were mixed and revealing. My brother's fiancée was furious and refused to apologize, claiming I was being overly sensitive and manipulative. She tried to rally other family members against me, painting me as unstable and vindictive. My parents were divided. My father was angry and accused me of holding the family hostage over a harmless prank. My mother was more reflective, admitting privately that they'd allowed me to be treated unfairly for too long. My brother's response surprised me most. He called 3 days after receiving the letter and asked if we could meet for coffee. His voice was different, less defensive, more thoughtful. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking about our relationship and some painful truths were starting to surface. We met at a neutral location, a small cafe neither of us had been to before. My brother looked exhausted, like he'd been wrestling with difficult realizations. He started by acknowledging that the place card incident was cruel and inexcusable, regardless of whose idea it had been. But then he went deeper. He admitted that he'd been using me as a foil for years, allowing our parents and others to compare us because it made him look better by contrast. He confessed that he'd never stood up for me because my struggles made his successes shine brighter. He talked about the pressure he felt to be perfect and how having a failure for a brother had actually been convenient for maintaining his image. When I struggled with jobs or relationships, it reinforced his position as the responsible one, the successful one, the son our parents could be proud of. The conversation lasted 3 hours. We both cried at different points, processing years of dysfunction and missed opportunities for genuine brotherhood. He apologized not just for the dinner, but for a pattern of behavior that had damaged our relationship and my self-worth. My brother's fiancée was not pleased with his newfound self-awareness. She'd been counting on marrying into a family where she could maintain social superiority over certain members. My refusal to accept that role and my brother's support of my boundaries threatened the dynamic she'd been expecting. The tension came to a head 2 weeks later when she gave my brother an ultimatum: choose between his family or their relationship. She couldn't accept that he was now defending me and insisting I be treated with respect. My brother chose family. Not just me, but the possibility of having a healthy family relationship built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy and competition. The engagement ended, and while I felt sorry for the pain he was experiencing, I was proud of his courage in making that choice. Update 3. 6 months have passed since the dinner that changed everything. The aftermath has been complicated but ultimately healing. My relationship with my brother has never been stronger. We've been working together to rebuild trust and establish new patterns of communication. My parents have been slower to change, but they're making efforts. My mother has apologized several times and admitted that she allowed her desire for social acceptance to override her responsibility to protect both her sons equally. My father is still struggling with the concept that his harmless teasing was actually harmful, but he's trying. I returned the motorcycle to my brother after he completed a series of actions that demonstrated genuine change, including confronting other family members who had participated in the dinner incident and setting boundaries with friends who made disparaging comments about me. The canceled wedding vendors turned into an unexpected networking opportunity. Several of them were impressed by my straightforward communication and professional handling of a difficult situation. 2 have offered me job opportunities in event planning and vendor coordination. The most significant change has been internal. I no longer accept being treated as less than I am. I've started therapy to work through years of internalized shame and low self-worth. I'm building friendships and relationships with people who see my value rather than my shortcomings. I've also discovered that standing up for myself didn't destroy my family. It saved it. By refusing to continue in the role of designated failure, I forced everyone to confront the toxic dynamics we'd all been enabling. Some relationships didn't survive that confrontation, but the ones that did are stronger and more authentic. My brother is dating someone new now, someone who treats our entire family with respect and doesn't need to put anyone down to feel superior. She's excited about having a brother-in-law and has never once made me feel like I need to apologize for existing. That place card reading, "The Failure," was meant to be my humiliation, but it became my liberation. Sometimes you have to lose the family you thought you had to find the family you actually deserve. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable dysfunction, even when that refusal comes with significant consequences. I learned that respect isn't given freely in some families. It has to be demanded and maintained through consistent boundaries. I discovered that my worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or comparisons, and that I have the power to change relationships by changing what I'm willing to accept. The dinner was supposed to put me in my place. Instead, it helped me find it.